So now we should let everyone in. And we're waiting for the YouTube to sync up. Okay. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the January 19th Public Design Commission meeting. If you're watching on YouTube and you would like to testify on today's public hearing item, you can find a link to sign up in the description below the video, and you can also find information on how to join the meeting in that description. Signe, we can start.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Signe Nielsen. I'm president of the Public Design Commission. We'll now begin the public meeting with a roll call to confirm commissioner attendance. When I call your name, if you could please say here. Phil Ahrens.
Here.
Kenseth Armstead.
Present.
Lori Hawkinson.
Here.
Deborah Martin.
Here.
Manuel Miranda.
Here.
Richard Moore.
Here.
Susan Morgenthau.
Here.
Ethel Sheffer.
Here.
Merrill Tisch. Mary Valverde.
Here.
And myself. So we have a better than a full quorum. So we'll now start by taking a vote on the consent agenda. We have today items 27654 to 27673. Staff has noted Commissioner Hawkinson's recusal from item number 27654. Are there any other recusals that have not been noted? No, so for the record, there are no further recusals. So now I'll call for the vote. Commissioners, when I call your name, please state your vote for the consent agenda. You may approve or reject all, or you may reject or abstain from individual projects. So I'll start with Phil.
Approve all.
Kenseth.
Approve all.
Lori.
Approve all.
Deborah.
Approve all.
Manuel.
Approve all.
Richard.
Approve all.
Susan.
Approve all.
Assuming Ethel is not here. Meryl. Ethel, sorry.
I'm here for approval.
Meryl's not here. Mary.
Approve all.
And myself approve all. So it passes unanimously for those present. So we'll now move on to the public hearing for item number 27674, the installation of an artwork by Kameelah Janan Rasheed at Willoughby Square Park, Brooklyn. So per the standard procedure, the applicants will give their presentation, then we'll have public testimony, then the commission can ask questions. We will then deliberate and vote. Carrie, are you going to?
Yeah, so Signe, just before we pass this on to the artist, I want to, for members of the public who may be joining us today, I do want to clarify that this is a conceptual proposal. The Public Design Commission reviews artworks at conceptual and then at preliminary. So this is very early. It's an opportunity for feedback, and it wouldn't be, the final approval is at preliminary level. So that may answer some questions that I saw online. And I also want to clarify that the Public Design Commission does not have jurisdiction over 227 Duffield Street. Thank you.
Great. Thank you.
Kendall,
Kendall Henry, is he here to introduce the project?
Yes, good morning. I just wanted to give some background information about the In Pursuit of Freedom project, so people have people have Kameelah's proposal in context. In 2008, the In Pursuit of Freedom project started at what became a groundbreaking public history partnership that generated new research on Brooklyn's Aboriginal movement. The project was in collaboration between the Brooklyn Historical Society, Irondale Assemblage Project, and Wheatsville Heritage Center. The information garnered through the research was presented in 5 different parts. A website that you could actually see right now is called inpursuitoffreedom.org. A series of exhibitions at Brooklyn Historical Society and at Weeksville, and performances done by Irondale. All these things brought the stories that were sort of revealed through the research of the anti-slavery movement to life. So, and so it also included a walking guided tour of prominent locations throughout Brooklyn's, that is part of Brooklyn's Aboriginal, part of that past. So one of the components of that was the commissioning of an artwork that sort of punctuated all these efforts into the park, and Percent for Art was tasked with commissioning the work with EDC. So with our process, some of you who aren't familiar with our process, prior to our commissioning process, we sort of get entry into the community through the community boards. So what we did is we presented this idea of commissioning a work to the community board 2 through a presentation, and invited them to the selection process, as well as members of the City Council and Borough President's Office. Additionally to that, we put together a panel of Brooklyn arts professionals from Mokata, Brooklyn Arts Council, Weeksville, Brooklyn Historical Society, Irondale, and a cultural anthropologist and curator, as well as people from Public Design Commission, the Percent for Art program, and an EDC for a first panel, which happened in September of 2019. At that meeting, we selected about 5 artists who were invited to do proposals, and the proposals were reviewed in February of 2020, at which time we had, a month later, we had the pause with the pandemic, and so everything was put on hold until very recently. Last week, we presented the first glimpse of the proposal that Kameelah presented to the commissioning board, to CB2, ahead of this conceptual design review. And this is, again, to reiterate what Carrie just said, this is just the first introduction of the project. You will see in Kameelah's presentation an extensive sort of community engagement component to her work, after which, after that is completed, we will go back to the community board to get more feedback. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Kameelah for her presentation.
Kameelah will unmute you, and I've given you control of the screen. You can test it out.
I currently do not have.
I see. There we go. Okay, great.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. So good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited to be sharing my presentation with you guys. Before we get started, I just think it's super important to introduce and reintroduce myself. Again, I'm Kameelah Janan Rasheed. I'm a former high school history teacher. I'm a graduate instructor at the School of Visual Arts. I'm also, for the 7th year now, a curriculum developer and professional learning manager at a nonprofit serving about 80 public schools in New York City. Also, I'm a small business owner where I support individuals and organizations in building out their projects. I'm also currently collaborating with a city historian back home in East Palo Alto to build out an archive of our radical education history around Nairobi schools. I'm providing this context because I think that's important for thinking about the role that I'm playing in this work, and the role that I think about art and building out communities and building out opportunities for pedagogical interventions. So I'll start here to say that we're just gonna, for the arc of this presentation, I'm gonna describe some of my past artwork to provide some examples of how I've worked with space, how I've worked with museums and galleries, how I've worked with communities, and then we're gonna actually get into the provisional plan for Willoughby Square. I want to say really, really quickly that in thinking about my work, what's most important for me as I'm engaging with history is to not think about sort of recasting or just providing an archive, but thinking about the questions and the context and the sort of power relationships that animate how we make sense of history and who actually is involved in telling that history. And so in thinking about this, I'm not interested in performances of solidarity, but I am really interested in thinking about futures. What can we do concerning how we leverage an archive to think about the futures of a particular moment, and how those archives can actually push us into a context where we're interrogating this question of emancipation over and over. So the first work that I want to start with here is a project that was just up at Brooklyn Museum. I've worked with Brooklyn Museums several times over the past several years since I've been in Brooklyn. And this was a project called Are We Reading Closely? And this was one of the first art the first artist project that was presented on the outside of the Brooklyn Museum and focus on the sort of political engagement around reading closely. As an educator, I think it's important to not only think about the action that we're doing out in communities, but also thinking again about the sources that we're using and engaging with those particular histories. So this project, which included 4 large banners in front of Brooklyn Museum, also came along with 2 public programs, which were virtual, of course, due to our COVID context, which engage people in certain critical strategies around close reading and engaging with where we pull our information from and what that means for the ways that we engage with communities in political action. This is a project at Brooklyn Public Library from 2019 called Scoring the Stacks. And this was organized around engaging with, again, the public to address questions around what sources and what language you actually rub up against in your day-to-day actions. So in the public library, there were a set of scores on the table that you can see in the corner there that prompted people to go to different parts of the library that they may not have usually gone to look at something there. And across 3 programs for 4 months, we did a series of activities where we work with musicians, we work with choreographers, we work with writers to actually produce work in communities. So we created a song, we created a series of writing, and then we also had a dance performance that focused on what are the things that we're finding in this library context, what does it mean to collaborate with people within the context of a 90-minute engagement, and what does that provide for us in terms of thinking about pedagogical engagements with community. This is from the 2017 Venice Biennale. It's a large banner, about 30 feet, which reads, "Are we there yet?" And focus on questions of proximity, destination, and relative comfort. The focus here was in paying attention to the ways in which we are not only thinking about the present, but thinking about our sort of construction of utopias and futures. And so the question, are we there yet, was about, are we at a particular place that we think we're supposed to be, but also forces us to think about who is the we in this question, what is the there and what is the yet. And so this was heavily photographed, and it was very interesting to see the ways in which people promptly responded to the question. And I think about this question as a question that cannot be answered once, but it's a question that we must engage with repeatedly. This is also from Brooklyn Museum back in 2018 and has gone up recently again. It's a series of questions which are, again, engaging us around conversations of futurity, around conversations of what Audre Lorde often talks about, revolution not being a one-time event, but something that we're constantly and repeatedly engaged with over time. Also at Brooklyn Museum, this is a project that was also part of the previous slide that was focused on a part of a speech called prepositions. Prepositions give us indication for location. So over, before, outside, along, below. And as folks were able to sit on different parts of these stairs, we engaged them in a series of questions related to the preposition. Thinking about who are you with? What are you willing to go along with? What are you standing against? What comes after this? And so a large part of my work is focused not on telling people what to think, but engaging people in conversation with their community members, with themselves, with their families, to think through these questions on their own terms, so that when we come together in community context, whether that community being a church, a mosque, a synagogue, your school, we have the critical strategies to engage in fruitful and democratic conversations. What I'm going to show you next are a series of billboards. This one is up in North Adams near Mass Mocha. This one is up in Little Rock in Arkansas. I have a lot of family in Little Rock, Arkansas. And so when this opportunity came up, I was interested in locating this in a place where I knew family members could actually pass by it, and asks us this question of what have you unlearned today, with a focus on the ways in which we are constantly thinking about what we have learned, but we also have a lot of unlearning work to do as well. This is a project called Selling My Black Rage to the Highest Bidder. This is really a conversation about the ways in which Black rage has been commodified, and the ways in which there are expectations for the representation of Black histories, representations of Black rage, representations of Black art, and me being very interested in the expectation that in any particular circumstance, that there is a homogeneous rather than a heterogeneous representation of things, representation of emotion. This was from a summer project with the Public Art Fund, where they invited several artists across the city to work on bus shelters and a range of other art on the grid contexts. And I decided to focus on the context of plot twist, and me being interested in the narration of history and thinking about the importance of thinking about plot twists and narrative disruption during my time as a high school teacher, where the most important moment for me in teaching was looking at a primary source and engaging with those moments of a plot twist. When are things going in ways that we don't imagine them going, and how does it open up an opportunity for a conversation about why things did not evolve in those expected ways, and what that opening provides for us in terms of understanding the future and building out the futures we desire. I'm going to wrap up quickly so we can get to this proposal. This is from a project I did with Times Square Art and For Freedoms this summer. My husband is in fact an essential worker. He has been going to work since the pandemic began. And we were asked to think about things we want the community to see who are going out to work, making sure the city keeps running. And I decided to make one that was sort of thinking about those who have partners and spouses who are out working every day, and sort of this call for us to take care of one another. As we get to the end of this, this is a project that was out in Glasgow in the UK called How to Suffer Politely and Other Etiquette. It again addresses issues around etiquette and comfort, and this compulsion around how folks, particularly Black folks, express rage, how we express any type of emotion, and again, the flattening or the expectation that Black folks have a homogenous response to any particular context. As we round this out, just a few more pieces just to show how I work with space, how I work with text. This is a typeface that I created myself, and sort of thinks about the interaction of humor and thinking about sort of aggregated apathy or sort of this lethargic legislation, and thinking about the pairing of those words to quickly get at an idea. This is a product at ICA Philadelphia, just again as an example of how I work with space. Also at Mass MoCA as an example also of how I'm working with space. This is at Nome Gallery in Berlin from November, also as a representation of how I'm working with space in color and text. This is from Rice University in Houston. This was part of a project, whoops. I think we got a little ahead of ourselves there. Thank you. Rice University in early 2020, and the project ended early, obviously because of COVID. And this included a series of prompts that were organized around the campus to engage at least the college students in this conversation around what we mean that a better future awaits us. Oops. And this is a book project that I created back in 2019. So just as a reminder that I'm working across many different environments with text, it's sort of my thing. And this is an engraving directly into the wall, which is similar to a product that I just finished, that I'm finishing up in California for the California Air Quality Board, where I engraved a series of items across space. It looks like the mouse really wants us to get to this proposal, so we're just gonna jump right in there. So it's clearly very eager. So when I was invited to submit a proposal for this particular park, I was super excited for two reasons. The first reason being that I've never really been interested in doing work that are monuments. I was like, I don't know if I really am interested in building like a thing that is representing a lot of things, but I really am interested in thinking about somatic and embodied experiences and how people move through space, and thinking about what it might mean to engage with an environment where language and opportunities for gathering were dispersed throughout the park. So what might it mean to actually turn the idea of a monument or a memorial on its head to say, what are the invitations we're giving to the public as they're wandering through the space, which is a space for both gathering and for passing through. So what I decided to do was to identify several locations that were basically seating areas in addition to an entry location, to sort of think about how these seating locations can be organized in a way to help us think through space and think through abolitionist futures in terms of, am I hearing something? Oh, abolitionist futures rather than simply abolitionist past. And so I wanna pause here really quickly to make one very clear note, which is that this project is not designed to represent all of abolitionist history. That is impossible. We as educators know that it takes more than one lesson to accomplish anything. And in a similar way, it's more than one product that's going to tell a particular story. And so a lot of the work that we're doing with this particular proposal is focused on the features of abolition and the questions that animate this particular feature, but it's also about thinking about the ways in which all the products that we're doing around abolition, both in Brooklyn, globally and nationally are all part of an ecosystem. And we know that within an ecosystem, all the organisms cannot do the same thing because that's not how an ecosystem functions. So this is an offering of one organism within a larger ecosystem of projects, which Kendall spoke to before, and the products that will come after this. So I was paying a lot of attention to a couple of things. So I looked at the space and I said, what are the things that I'm noticing? And I said, there are lots and lots of spaces here that are seating areas. And I started to think about what these seating areas reminded me of. And these seating areas reminded me a lot of porches. They reminded me a lot of stoops. They reminded me of a lot of locations within Black vernacular architecture, which were places for gathering, places for storytelling, places for rest, places for safety, places for privacy. And I thought about given the affordances and the constraints of the space, how can these spaces be then again reanimated to think about if people are going to take a sit in these spaces, what are types of things could happen in those spaces? So I focus on what if we could have text, questions, etc., engraved into these places. And so I know there are some questions around whether or not porches represent activism. And that was an interesting moment for me to read because it seems that there is some confusion in actually understanding the point here. Nothing represents activism. Activism is activism. And so what we're really paying attention to here is the ways in which porches and other sorts of architecture in this manner have played a role in Black vernacular architecture and the ways in which this architecture has played a role in gathering as a space for people to tell stories, as a place for people to rest. And so in thinking about these examples, there are several images here of people talking about these spaces, but in no way are these representative of anything because representation is always a trap in the ways that it can never capture everyone. I also want to point to the ways in which porches have been talked about throughout the communities of architecture within the communities of vernacular and more traditional architecture have been talked about throughout many communities. Zorna Hurston reminds us of this as well. My grandmother reminds me of this. My mother reminds me of this. My mother-in-law reminds me of this. And so paying attention to these particular architectures as things that I want to pay special attention to. And thinking about the engraving, there are a couple of notes that I want to add here. I've been working with engraving on another space for another project, and I was really interested in thinking about what it might mean to actually dig into a surface, but also wanting to pay not just attention to the process of engraving, but paying special attention to the typefaces that are being used. So I want to bring special attention to a couple of inspirations for the typeface. The first is the Freedman's Torchlight, which is the paper that came out of the Weeksville community. And I was very interested in the typeface here in my own personal studies around typeface, in particular vernacular typefaces, and the ways in which metal type is sort of worn and how that gives particular character. And also the Ram's Horn, which was a newspaper that was published throughout New York by a free Black who was from Virginia, who relocated to New York. And so paying attention to those things. Also, I did a bit of digging and was able to find Black News, which was a newsletter that was published in Brooklyn in the 70s, and it was a newspaper that used a mix of a pre-existing typeface as well as hand drawing, as well as typewriters, and being interested in making use of that as well. I'm also, very interested in thinking about the signage in different parts of Brooklyn as a reminder of the ways in which language and type show up across different environments and using that as inspiration as well. As you can see, again, these are the locations for the various installations of text, the stepped area here, the seating area here, the walking area as well. So thinking about people walking and moving through the space. And this freestanding piece. So obviously COVID hit and our first desire and concern is making sure that people are safe. And so the original plans to engage with the community in person can no longer happen because our main concern here is making sure that people are safe. And so in response to that, using my 20 years of experience as both an educator and as a facilitator and working in communities, I decided to identify 5 pathways for us to engage with communities in safe manners. And by safe, I mean that people both feel safe and that they won't get sick, but also feel safe and that there are multiple pathways for engagement. So the first thing that I want to note here is that we want to be mindful of folks who may not have access to computers, may not have access to Wi-Fi, but may visit institutions throughout the community and on their routes. So one option or one pathway was to think about actually engaging with public libraries and other public institutions in this particular area of Brooklyn in order to leave cards and prompts for folks who may want to respond to questions or make suggestions for questions or texts. And I know that people are saying, oh, where is all the text? We don't know what she's going to be talking about. You're not supposed to, because I don't have the right to make that decision. It's important that we're actually talking to the community, which is why there's no decided on text, because that is not my right to do. I want to actually talk to people before that happens. And so one option for starting to generate language and text that will be in the park are through these prompt cards. The second option was what we're doing now, which is a regular Zoom meeting. We can have as many Zoom meetings as we want. This is really an opportunity to try to get to and talk to as many people as possible, and that will take time for that to actually happen. Another option is collaboration with public school teachers. As I noted at the beginning, I've been working in education now for about 20 years, and I've been working with a nonprofit for the past 7 years, building out curriculum. And I already know that the In Pursuit of Freedom curriculum exists. And so this will be an opportunity to collaborate with public schools who are interested in leveraging something that's already part of this ecosystem, which is this pre-existing curriculum, to facilitate lessons and or work with me in order to develop new lessons in which we can actually engage with students and ask them, a 5-year-old, a 10-year-old, a 13-year-old, what are your thoughts about this particular history? What are your thoughts? What questions are you still having about where we are in relation to where we thought we would be? We also have just the traditional Google form, which might be a great asynchronous way for people to quickly engage. We also have email correspondence, which again, is another quick asynchronous way for people to engage. And then also people can just call me. I think it's important for me to emphasize that COVID has changed a lot of the ways that we work with community. And I've been working on several projects where we're trying to figure out what the best process and balance of things are. And what I have been learning is that having multiple pathways for engagement is the most important thing to focus on here. I'm gonna end here. Was just reminding us again that this is one item in a larger ecosystem of projects which are trying to address questions around abolition or concerns around abolition, and that this one organism cannot do all of the work, but I'm really excited to be the organism or an organism within this structure that's thinking about questions of futurity and how abolition is not a one-time event. And so I just want to end on part of a speech from Audre Lorde. She gave the speech in 1982 for her speech looking back at the 60s. This is at Harvard University, and she was reflecting on the 60s. And she tells us two really important things. First, she says, as Black people, if there's one thing we can learn from the 60s, it is how infinitely complex any move for liberation must be. For we must move against not only those forces which dehumanize us from outside, but also against those oppressive values which we have forced to be taken onto ourselves. Through examining the combination of our triumphs and errors, we can examine the dangers of an incomplete vision, not to condemn that vision, but to alter it, to construct templates for possible futures, and to focus our rage for change upon our enemies rather than upon ourselves. She further reminds us that revolution is not a one-time event. So again, I'm focused on the templates for the future and reminding ourselves that for us to ensure that revolution is not a one-time event of abolition at this particular moment, we have to hold abolition as a history in the same hand that we're also asking questions about the future. So thank you for coming to this presentation, listening, and I'm looking forward to hearing what the audience has to say.
Thank you very much, Kameelah. That was beautifully stated. Carrie, has anyone signed up to give public testimony? And we will take that testimony before we deliberate.
Yes, and I just want, before I start calling on people, I do want to note that if anyone's watching on YouTube right now and would like to give testimony, please do sign up using the link. There's a form linked in the description below the video. And there are also instructions on how to join the Zoom meeting in the video description. The first person that we have on our list is Todd Fine. So we're going to unmute him.
And we have a 2 minutes?
3 minutes. Yes, I will time you with 3 minutes.
Yes, I'm Todd Fine. I'm the president of the Washington Street Advocacy Group, which does advocacy on public art. Before the pandemic, after DCLA Commissioner Finkelpearl left because of challenges at the Percent for Art program, Councilmember Jimmy Van Bramer promised that there would be more transparency under Commissioner Casals. This morning, we have another Percent for Art initiative whose meetings were done entirely secretly in violation of the reform laws passed a few years ago. None of the local advocates who have spent 2 decades now trying to save the history of abolitionism around this park were invited, and there's no public record of the meeting locations. If they knew where they were, they would have been allowed to attend. So EDC apparently made them secret. Only today we learned that an artist selection took place in February 2020 without making the finalist designs public, and last week is the first time anyone has heard of it, in grave violation of the transparency laws. Since the Design Commission is allowed to evaluate public processes, they can force this to be considered again before this process becomes another endless PR and legal fight. It's absurd for the artist to say that the public gets to decide the text when they had no role in any of it. No one has a problem with trusting artists to implement a design if there's a public buy-in to the concept itself. With 1 year left, the de Blasio administration has another 11 major monuments in the works that are in the works and are delayed. This is a bad sign for the transparency of any of them and promises massive resistance. The city falsely believes that these public art initiatives have been delayed because of the public processes. So in this case, NYEDC and DCLA decided to jettison them entirely and do the process secretly in its entirety, making the Percent for Art procedures, which PDC has now claimed to embrace for all private art initiatives, into a joke. However, these art initiatives are going to be delayed precisely because the secrecy is causing the city to make ill-founded decisions that generate public backlash. We see this in the badly considered locations for most of the she-built NYC monuments, as well as the lazy approach to the Brooklyn Abolitionism Memorial, which doesn't deal with history at all. And today we have an example of where the city is attempting to rush approval for a proposal that is hardly formed at all. It doesn't even meet the very basic conceptual guidelines for the PDC. It's a shame. This park was built because the rezoning of downtown Brooklyn destroyed a historic area and destroyed many buildings linked to Black history and the history of abolitionism. We don't need to look to the future of abolitionism. We have destroyed the past, and we need to recognize it explicitly. Last night, I reviewed the statements by Mayor Bloomberg and Councilmember Letitia James. They spoke of a great memorial park for the specific individuals and organizations that led the abolitionist movement. 14 years the city had to work on this memorial. And what do we have now? A park project whose art component was a complete afterthought and played no role in the park design, an incomplete proposal with no text, no set locations, no materials, no font, nothing, just hope that you will expedite things for EDC's request. A proposal that doesn't acknowledge a single abolitionist leader or even mention the word abolitionism in the proposal text. And also, finally, an exclusion of the activists who worked on 227 Duffield, who fought Michael Bloomberg and forced this concession of a park, and now were excluded from the public art processes and had their wishes entirely ignored for historical monument. The PDC must reject this proposal and listen to the community activists who have been working on this for 2 decades now. Thank you.
The next person we have is Jacob Morris. Can someone unmute him?
Okay, I'm unmuted.
Great.
I want to thank the Public Design Commission for having me this morning. This right here is from a letter. This is a letter from Community Board 2 to the president of EDC in October of 2019. This renames the park. I was responsible for this. This renames the park from Willoughby Square to Abolitionist Place Park. Of course, that directly derives from Duffield Street being co-named Abolitionist Place, which I was responsible for in 2007. And not for nothing, but I was also responsible for Gold Street being renamed Ida B. Wells Place, which is 1 block from the park. Other people will connect Ida B. Wells and the Sisters in Freedom proposal, which there's a tremendous upwelling of community support for Sisters in Freedom to be placed in the park, which is incredibly appropriate and honors all these great women freedom fighters from Brooklyn in this such appropriate location. This presentation violates a major contract that was executed in 2008 for In Pursuit of Freedom pursuant to a competitive RFP process, which had four major submissions, and was won by the Brooklyn Historical Society with its sub-vendors. EDC admits, along with Percent for Art, that they have not the littlest tiny bit collaborated or communicated with the In Pursuit of Freedom project and people. This mission, the mission of the reason for putting artwork, a memorial in this park explicitly as per $1 million capital allocation. And by the way, we don't know what the budget is. This is plainly a violation of contract law. And by the way, in terms of Zora Neale Hurston, I was personally responsible for getting the street in front of Graham Court, where she lived in Harlem. I got that street named after her. So I love Zora Neale Hurston. This has nothing to do with honoring Brooklyn's great role in the abolitionist movement.
Your 3 minutes are up.
This proposal should be tabled.
Thank you.
Proposal.
The next person we have is Raoul Rothblatt.
Hi, can you hear me and see me? Okay, hi. I have prepared remarks here.
Okay, you have 3 minutes.
Thank you for listening to me. I'm a little bit stuck. Before I start, the current proposal has the dog park next to 227 Duffield, and that's actually at the exact spot where there were underground tunnels that were owned by abolitionists, and you would literally be having dog pee going where there were tunnels under abolitionist homes. So I just want to point that out. So let me get back to my prepared remarks. It's just a little hard for me to get beyond that. What is important about Abolitionist Place Park is its specificity. The EDC continues to call it Willoughby Square Park, but it was renamed Abolitionist. It was renamed by Community Board 2 in 2019. This sacred piece of land lies at the heart of 100 years of African-American activism. And my goal is to make a monument to the history of those blocks that will rival the importance of the Statue of Liberty. I believe every American should know that the first Black Women's Suffrage Club was founded in this neighborhood. Everyone should know that Ida B. Wells moved to this block to escape the press that burnt down her press in Memphis Dog Park on top of it. The EDC seems grimly intent on destroying any mention of this history. First, they tried to confiscate and destroy 227 Abolitionist Place to build this park. Back in 2013, the plan was to build an underground parking lot. And the irony of an underground parking lot at this spot of a likely underground railroad site created this grassroots movement that I am so proud to be a part of. The EDC was forced to pay a firm called AKRF $500,000 to try to dismiss this history. Instead, the peer reviewers that they contracted all came out strongly in favor of its preservation. Dr. Cheryl Roche called Abolitionist Place the most exciting place for underground railroad research in the country. So this is broadly, I know I'm speaking specifically about 227 Duffield, but that's part of the context here. And one of the important parts of 227 Duffield was its connection to the other buildings. After the rejection of the AKRF report, New York City committed $2 million for the In Pursuit of Freedom, which is fantastic. It brought out more of the connections of the unique and powerful history of this neighborhood. The city has yet to fulfill its obligation to spend the remaining $1 million to honor this history at Abolitionist Place Park. So back in 2007, the city spent $500,000 to get rid of this history. In 2021, they used secrecy and simply failed to inform the stakeholders about the current proposal, which willfully ignores the specific history of the neighborhood. The focus on porches is the exact opposite of what the neighborhood is, what's important about the neighborhood. We talk about the underground tunnels.
Can you please finish up? Thank you.
Okay, so the organizations there were highly structured, and we have developed a proposal, the Sisters in Freedom proposal, which gets support from all the elected officials from about 6 schools, including 3 schools who were named after important students. And my daughter's Girl Scout troop has created a video to release this weekend to support our vision of Sisters in Freedom. If you want to listen to children, teenagers, we have the video. We'll be glad to share it with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. The next person on the list is Victoria Cambranes, but I don't see her in the meeting, so I'm going to skip to the next person, who is Stacy Shub. Go ahead, you have 3 minutes.
Hi, thank you. My main objection is not with the artist herself. I have no issues with Miss Willoughby's work, nor her obviously extensive credentials. To be clear, my objection is with the EDC circumventing the community engagement process by shutting the community out of the vetting and selection process itself as to whether or not Miss Willoughby's voice and style is the most appropriate for this particular project. Additionally, the design plan I viewed appeared to be incomplete and vague in the telling of the story of abolitionism. I would request that this be reconsidered. Thank you for your consideration.
Okay, thank you. So Sean Sweeney is next on the list, but I do not see that person in here. So I'm going to go to, let's see, Linda Roche. No. Marina Ortiz, Lincoln Ressler, Lynn Ellsworth. Sorry, I'm just reading the names, but I don't see these people in the list. Curtis Harris would be the next person on the list. Go ahead.
Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Good morning, and thank you for allowing me to testify for the conceptual design proposal by Kameelah Janan Rasheed. My name is Curtis Harris. I'm a candidate for New York City Council in the 35th Council District, representing Fort Greene, Crown Heights, Clinton Hill, Prospect Heights, and Bedford-Stuyvesant. To my sister Kameelah, I say assalamu alaikum. First of all, respectfully, for something in our culture as important as abolition, we must not be abstract. We just celebrated MLK Day. And in my opinion, the current proposal is a direct assault on the Black organizations that were founded near or in Abolitionist Place Park, including the churches, literary societies, political clubs, and organizations such as the NAACP and Urban League. It claims to honor Black history, but doesn't mention that it's one half block from the home of Ida B. Wells. We call on the community to reject this proposal completely. The NYC Economic Development proposal for what they call Willoughby Square Park is insultingly vague and devoid of any connection to the history of the neighborhood. The proposal says that the design will include text, but does bother to mention that the text will be, but doesn't bother. It's a stretch to even call what the EDC presents a proposal, since it does not delve into its design approach, the process that led to the presentation, or even what font they will use for the text-based presentation. It is an insult to the years of activism of people who have working to engage the community with a positive vision for downtown Brooklyn. Of course, the EDC purposely failed to notify any stakeholders of their embarrassing presentation. Luckily, there's been a grassroots effort for a better proposal. Several elected officials, including Congressional Representative Hakeem Jeffries and Borough President Eric Adams, joined several schools to present the Sisters in Freedom proposal. This letter is not to advocate for that proposal, but rather to demand a more transparent and democratic process. One of the themes of the EDC's whitewashed version of history is to refer to porches as a form of activism. While that might be true in more suburban or rural settings, the African-American activists of downtown Brooklyn met inside a very intentional setting. They developed a profound religious, intellectual, and social traditions in the churches surrounding Abolitionist Place Park, including Concord Baptist, Bridge Street, Fleet Street, and Silo Baptist. They organized activist organizations like the First Black Women's Suffrage Club. Their schools and literary societies were right next to Abolitionist Place Park. We demand the Design Commission reject the EDC's meager proposal for Abolitionist Place Park, and we demand that they stop calling it Willoughby Square. Thank you very much.
Thank you. The next person we have on the list is Julie Finch.
Hello, I am Julie Finch, a co-chair of Friends of Hopper Gibbons Underground Railroad House in Manhattan. I am against this proposal. Since the park's creation directly destroyed the abolitionist history of Brooklyn via Bloomberg's eminent domain, this is not a good plan. Ms. Rasheed's plan includes front porches, which is too shallow an idea. It could be, she could use stoops, which is at least a New York City substitute for a porch. And it is irrelevant to Brooklyn's downtown history. So I'm going to continue with the rest of my co-chair, Fern Luskin's statement. It is extremely important not to scale down the original plans for the Abolitionist Place Park, which should be designated as such rather than as Willoughby Square Park, which erases its significance as a center of Underground Railroad activity. The still extant remnants of the Underground Railroad are elusive because this method of conducting African-American slaves to freedom was by its very nature secret. And she continues talking about the abolitionists Thomas and Harriet Truesdell and Elizabeth Harris, a North Carolina-born African-American woman who lived there with them as a servant. In its immediate environs is the Plymouth Church, among other churches like Bridge Street Church, which definitely provided refuge to slaves. And we all know that Frederick Douglass and Harriet Tubman delivered speeches in the 1860s there. Ida B. Wells, the valiant abolitionist and suffragette, also lived in the neighborhood. All of this points to the fact that the neighborhood was at the core of the abolitionist movement in Brooklyn. So I want to say that this is a sham. It's suitable only for preserving the building at 227 Duffield, and it's suitable only for the giant Sheraton Hotel overlooking the so-called EDC's word for this park, which is insultingly Willoughby Square Park. The EDC is only interested in money, and it destroys local preservationist historic sites like South Street Seaport wherever it can. It's an enemy of history. Thank you.
Thank you. Excuse me, the next person on the list is Minnie Owens.
Greetings. Thank you very much. Good morning. You know, we're all still reeling, obviously, from the incredibly horrid and shocking insurrection on our Capitol. An insurrection which brought the Confederate flag in the midst of the Capitol and a noose on the grounds. Clearly, that experience and the experience of the last 4 years is tied greatly to the deep level of, at best, ignorance around appreciation an understanding of this country's greatest asset, its diversity, and the rich experience and contributions of so many people, and particularly the African-American community. The racist revisionists of the turn of the century, the proponents of the lost cause, certainly knew the power of monuments, of renaming, of plaques, of streets, to ensure the conveyance of their manipulated revisionist history. Now, I'm not a proponent of propaganda, and I appreciate that we want art here, but we need art that also is true to the telling of vitally important and overlooked histories. Honestly, even though I have a master's degree and I'm Ivy League educated, I only knew one name, Ida Wells Barnett, of the bevy of names that have come forward of these incredible African-American women that have been talked about in the last couple of years in the renaming of a local school, in the running up to the 100th anniversary of women's suffrage. I only knew one of those names. Why is that? My daughter, because we go out of our way to find the Schomburg and special exhibitions and go to the Harriet Tubman and the Frederick Douglass monuments up in Harlem, my daughter knows of these places, but for the average person, for the general public, they have no exposure in all of New York and certainly in Brooklyn to the history of African Americans. We need a monument that tells a story of struggle. I'm sorry, porches, as you yourself said, the artist, and I appreciate who you are and your background, convey a sense of rest, of openness, of comfort. I lived in North Carolina, and when I was the victim of a skinhead incident, I had to go inside from my porch, away from my porch, in order to plan clandestinely out of fear of retribution from some of my neighbors. Porches are not a place of organizing, of insurrection, in many cases, proper insurrection. They're a place of safety and comfort. That's not what we need to convey here. The concept is off, the process is off. We need to honor and not whitewash this critically important history that Brooklyn has and is right now not celebrating. We need a monument to these women, to democracy, to freedom, civil rights, and human rights. Please, please realize that's not what this proposal does. Thank you.
The next person on the list is Lawrence Frommer. Okay. Shanae Lee, let me just find you.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, please go ahead.
All righty. Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Shanae Lee. I'm a performing activist and daughter of the late Joy Chattel, owner of 227 Abolitionist Place, home of abolitionists Thomas and Harriet Lee Truesdell. First and foremost, I'd like to wish everyone a very healthy and prosperous new year. And getting right to the point, I recently read an article in the Brooklyn paper where the EDC's borough director, Ricky DaCosta, stated that they were not working with any buildings nearby, but focused solely on the square itself. I'm quoting, "We are directly coordinating with whatever is happening we are not directly coordinating with whatever is happening at any of the neighboring sites. Our main concern is this open space and getting it constructed, and also living up to the commitment of having there be a memorial artwork to the abolitionist history of Brooklyn." No disrespect to Borough Director DaCosta, but it is this thinking that dismantles the very meaning of community. A project of this magnitude should be well thought out for the benefit and inclusiveness of the people. It must reflect the accomplishment and greatness of these same people. I have a couple of questions. Why would this park not be named Abolitionist Place Park when these same nearby buildings and neighboring sites that Mr. DaCosta speaks of house courageous individuals who tirelessly fought for the freedom and liberation of African people, women, and indentured servants? What is the reasoning behind not coordinating with what's happening at neighboring sites? How can you totally disconnect the two if you are trying to instill the preservation of the abolitionist movement? Just a half a block away from the park is the former home of renowned journalist, and may I say first investigative reporter, Ida B. Wells, who exposed the atrocities of lynching. Maritza Raymond Lyons, an educator and vice principal who ensured that children of color had access to a fair and equal education as their white counterparts, lived in this area as well. Susan Smith McKinney, first Black woman to earn a medical degree, 1881, she co-founded a homeopathic hospital and dispensary and was a member of the Women's Local Union. Sarah Garnett, sister of Susan Smith McKinney, was the first Black female public school principal in New York City. She owned a seamstress shop that also acted as a meeting place for the Equal Suffrage League and was proclaimed the superintendent of suffragists. Victoria Earl Matthews was a self-educated activist for civil rights. She was a journalist, essayist, and suffragist who encouraged Ida B. Wells's anti-lynching campaign. She founded the Women's Loyal Union and helped found the National Federation of Afro-American Women. She was instrumental in merging the National Colored Women's League with the National Association of Colored Women in 1896. All of these women of color were extremely active within these neighboring sites that Mr. DaCosta chooses not to interact with. I ask that there is a reconsideration on not only naming the park Abolitionist Place Park, but also considering creating statues commemorating these sisters of freedom that I speak of. This, I feel, would definitely memorialize the rich history of the abolitionist movement in Brooklyn. Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry, the next person on the list is Beth Boujdeke, I think is. Beth?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you so much. So my name is Beth, and I'm a member of the Library and History Committee of the Brooklyn Monthly Meeting of the Religious Society of Friends, which is also commonly known as Quakers. We've been part of life in downtown Brooklyn since 1835. I wanted to thank the New York City Design Commission for letting us all participate in this important meeting, and also for Kameelah for your presentation. I'm really looking forward to sharing the notes from this presentation and the testimonies of all the participants to the Brooklyn Monthly Meeting members and attendees, because it's good to hear that the intention is to communicate that abolition is not a one-time event. And I'm personally heartened to hear that this is a preliminary stage, and that you guys do seek collaboration from the community. But in reviewing the plans before the commission as they are, we see that what has been offered is still incomplete and has little connection to downtown Brooklyn abolitionist history. So we think that this proposal is far from being ready for approval. We do hope that that it explicitly recognizes the history of abolition in Brooklyn, that it's specific. You know, we don't think porches is specific enough and doesn't relate to the downtown Brooklyn. I heard many people comment the same thing. We agree. We also really think it's important to note very specific participants that are important to Brooklyn's history. People like Ida B. Wells, the Kroger brothers, Louis Napoleon, James Pennington. And so we really do want specific mentions or inclusions in the artwork. And we also think that a full budget and proper design, final design is right, since the park's creation directly destroyed the abolitionist history of downtown Brooklyn, with the sole exception of 227 Duffield, which we fervently hope will be the crown jewel. So at the very least, we're hoping that this proposal for the park should be rejected until it can be presented again with specific detail, more specific detail of its design, and also with much more collaboration from the community. There seems to be a lot of willing people. And we are also standing by, ready to help. We would love to participate. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, the next person is Anthony Beckford.
Hello, everybody. My name is Anthony Beckford. I am a city council candidate for the 45th City Council District here in Brooklyn, but I am also the president and co-founder of Black Lives Matter Brooklyn. I'm going to be very clear on this issue. Anything that does not acknowledge the fighters, the participants, the people who have dedicated and sacrificed so much to make history, to provide progress when it comes to Black abolition, when it comes to Black liberation, is whitewashing of our history. And we've gone through enough of that. And we will not tolerate it any further. Even to this day, we are consistent victims of a colonial society that refuses to acknowledge our history, refuses to teach our history, and will continue to rename our history, but yet they have not lived our history. We will refuse to allow this to continue. One, for me to see on the screen the consistent name of Willoughby Square, to me is offensive. It is Abolition Place Park. And that is what it's to be named as, to be addressed as, and from this day forth, to be acknowledged as. Two, we did not fight for our liberation on porches. We may have stood on porches and sat on porches to debrief or to try to bring forth a sense of community after everything that we have faced as a Black people. But our liberation and our fight was consistent, was a flowing movement, and did not take place sitting down on our behinds. So our history will not be taking place with people sitting down on words or walking over words. What needs to happen is the erection of monuments and statues that directly identifies each woman that was a part of the abolitionist movement. So that way, when the children and their families and our future generations walk through the park, they are able to see these monuments, able to read about these monuments, but then also be able to learn their history. I tell people that when we learn our history and teach our youth their history, not only do they know who they are and where they came from, but they are also prepared for who they are to be. Anything that goes against that is racist, bigoted, and biased. This is not an attack on the artist, Ms. Rasheed, but this is a direct statement to the commission itself, to any elected official that may, behind the doors, try to side with any whitewashing of our history. This is notice from the movement to the commission that we will not stand by idly as we currently, this day, have our bodies beaten and maimed by the system today, to continue the fight that started back then. Thank you.
Thank you. Diana Ducros.
Thank you for letting me speak today. I'm speaking on behalf of Save Chelsea. I'm going to read from some prepared remarks. Less than 2 weeks ago, a front page article in the New York Times real estate section asked, "Are landmarks that celebrate Black history given proper consideration by city government?" It stated, "That is a question hovering over two threatened antebellum homes once owned by abolitionists, 227 Duffield Street in Brooklyn and 857 Riverside Drive in Manhattan. While these historic treasures are far from Chelsea, they are part of a heritage in which we proudly have a stake, as Chelsea is home to the Hopper Gibbons House, an underground railroad site which we have fought for years to preserve. At a time when shameful Confederate monuments are being removed from city parks nationwide, Brooklyn should celebrate the proudest aspects of its history, its role as a national center for the anti-slavery movement, in this park just steps from 227 Duffield Street, and other important abolitionist and Underground Railroad sites. In referring to this treasured local history, the park's artwork might inspire visitors to seek out and learn more about the historic ground beneath their feet, the layered history, unique, irreplaceable, and site-specific that makes New York so resonant and worth living in. Willoughby Square Park could be anywhere. How many other places can legitimately boast an abolitionist square park? That's a name and history we New Yorkers are deeply privileged to own. It should never be taken for granted. We strongly urge the Design Commission not to waste an opportunity to celebrate the historically rich abolitionist setting of this park and its artwork, and to call for a new proposal that better honors it. Thank you.
Sorry, thank you. And Elizabeth Adams is next. Elizabeth, what do you?
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you all. I work for the local council member, Stephen Levin, as its legislative director. Thank you to the Design Commission and to EDC for this morning's hearing. And thank you to Ms. Rasheed for her presentation this morning. The council member has been a strong supporter of preserving the abolitionist history in the neighborhood, including co-naming Gold Street after Ms. Ida B. Wells, and doing a plaque in downtown Brooklyn to honor her, and then as well as working with a number of folks who are here today in support of landmarking and preserving 227 Duffield Street. And he's also a strong supporter of renaming Abolitionist Park moving forward. So in the past, we've asked EDC for a full plan for the park space. We would like to see that as a next step here for the future before moving forward. Neighbors have asked for a memorial park that honors the history of the neighborhood and really works in partnership with Brooklyn's abolitionist history. As community members have already raised, 227 Duffield Street is right around the corner on the block. And historical leaders, as mentioned in the Sisters in Freedom proposal, like Ms. Wells, lived right nearby. And that's part of the reason that the council member sent a letter in support of the Sisters in Freedom proposal. This is separate from that, but I think it highlights the importance of having really strong community engagement and historical planning for the park overall. Our office was unfortunately not given notice of this hearing or of the proposal prior to today. So we do have some questions of what is in the proposal overall. There is an extremely important opportunity here to center Black history in Brooklyn, and we have already lost so much of that history in the neighborhood. So I have a few questions that we would like to discuss and follow up with EDC on. So one, what is the full scope of the Memorial Park proposal? And would EDC be willing to have a meeting with the council member about the planning here and about the project? Two, what is the connection with abolitionists and your planning history nearby? That I think has been stressed as a really important priority for the community. And then three, what is the process of this proposal and the timeline for community next steps? As was mentioned, the community engagement process. I think we would like a better understanding of what that means before any approval happens and moves forward. It is incredibly important to us that planning for the space be done with the community. Before a monument is approved, we would really like to see a full plan for the park and honoring abolitionist history on the site. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And that is the last person on our list. Signe, if you'd like to move forward with commissioner deliberation.
Indeed. That's a lot for us to think about. So would someone like to begin to offer some comments on what we've heard?
Hello. I just want to first say thank you to the artists for your presentation. I wanted to just acknowledge the artists and say that I'm sitting here as an advocate for the artists, and to let everyone know that we cannot tell an artist how to make artwork, because that's their purview. They create the artwork and they design. So we are not here to tell artists how to make their work. And from understanding Kameelah's previous or earlier work, I know that her work is centered on more ephemeral and conceptual dialogue. So I appreciate all that she's doing and has done in the past to center history through dialogue and text in her work. So I know that this is a conceptual proposal, and that perhaps we shouldn't be sort of criticizing the artwork in itself. We should really revisit the overall design of the entire park and perhaps question the citing of the budget and how fixed the entire proposal was, whether there are certain aspects of the proposal like the fountain that is necessary, the certain layout of where things are, and perhaps that artwork could be presented or erected in other places in the park. I understand that there is a great need for the community to hear and to contribute to the work and design. And I think that what is flawed is not the artist's presentation, but it is perhaps the negotiation of community board and time and the order in which things are heard and presented. I think because it is a monument, there needs to be a consideration of history and present ideas. But just like other other monuments, this monument is in pursuit of freedom. So the monument is for that and not for specific people. So that's something that perhaps the artist herself can reconsider in terms of that, because if there's a monument for a theme or for a movement, it is not based on one person and it's never a fixed movement. So it'll continue. So I understand the artist having that as part of her dialogue and her narrative and why she chose certain elements and did not choose a literal person. Again, we cannot tell an artist how to make artwork. That is not what we do when we present public art. It is though, the artist does need to consider the idea of permanence and future reading of the artwork. So again, I think that perhaps we can reconsider or revisit the entire design and perhaps give more voice to the artist where she would like to place work, not necessarily something that's has to be optically looked down on, but perhaps something that may be erected up. Maybe there's an opportunity in other places in the park to present a more monumental physical iteration. I know that she's capable of it. I've seen her previous work, and I'm not sure if anyone else has any other notes to say, other commissioners.
Thank you, Mary. Would anyone else like to speak up here? Commissioners?
Yeah, I'd like to second, I agree with everything that Mary said, Commissioner Mary Valverde said. I'm a graphic designer, so I work a lot with public language, and I understand the kind of, this is a very different purview from working with, specific representational imagery. I think there's an interesting kind of, I guess the kind of trick of like art of language is, it's how does it appear kind of experiential rather than, didactic. And I think that's, I think you deal with that in your work. And I also want to say that I really love your work. I think it's really monumental. I also teach graphic design, and I think it's your work and your practice is very instructive for graphic designers and dealing with language in public space. And I think that monumentality, I'm looking forward to how, in the way that you framed your presentation, how that monumentality will kind of become more present as the design develops. I agree that, some of the signage, not signage, I'm sorry, but some of the presentation or the, proposed locations for text, do seem in kind of more secondary locations. And so I'm curious to see, how do you respond to or speak to the monumentality aspect of the project? Yeah, and also another thing, in working with, in my own practice, working with architects, landscape architects, with public signage, since it is permanent, speaking to what Mary was saying as well, I think it's fair, some of the concerns about, how will the signage look over time, how will it look when people, stand on it, if it gets smudged, if gum gets stuck on it, these are all kind of like normal sort of processes that you demonstrate when you're presenting signage in an architectural project. And I think it's fair to ask for that in this project as well, although recognizing that it is more of a public art piece and not a didactic signage piece. Thank you, and thanks for the presentation.
Thank you, Manuel. Would anyone else like to speak? Lori, Deborah?
I would just like to third what my fellow commissioners have said, and I want to thank Kameelah Janan Rasheed for an incredible presentation, which was super clear and precise. And I have tremendous respect for her work. And I think I would just look for some of the points that were brought up, that we could perhaps think about this, rethink the location of the work in the park and think of it, kind of throw the net wider maybe, and not think that we just have to only be in precise places that are maybe more discrete, but that we could be more straightforward and upfront and in locating wherever the piece is located. Not that it's one thing, it could be many things. And I think also relooking at the fountain specifically is an opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you, Lori. Susan, Deborah, Ethel?
I want to say that I agree with everything my fellow commissioners have said. And Kameelah, very much appreciate your passion and the work that you showed us. And also your observation that you were giving a great deal of thought to how people move through space. And several, including Mr. Owens and others, brought up the question of the history and how the story of the history and the name of this place and the names of those who fought for abolition come into the work. And I want to say that we all support you and we want to see you succeed in this very important commission that you have received, and that there will be many who would support your work in terms of connecting the language to the form and making the way people move through space, the way they understand the history. So I encourage you to seek out support of those who could help with that. And I think Mary raised the important point that some of that may involve rethinking the placement of your work and the formal expression of the messages that you're communicating.
May I just add, I do agree very much with the statements and remarks of my colleagues. I also was extremely impressed in general with the sincerity, the thoughtfulness of many of the people, almost all from the community who spoke. And I believe that their respect for the artist, but the importance that they placed on the history of this neighborhood and this time was something that they contemporaneously maybe ethnically, for some, not a part of that, but their desire and willingness to be a part by respecting, working with the artist and with not only an appropriate, but an important artwork that reflects all that the artist wants to do and our history in Brooklyn.
Thank you, Ethel.
Signe, before, there was one person who had signed up who joined late. Her name is Victoria Cambranes. Would you like, she's there. I just wanted to give her an opportunity to speak before we wrap up.
Okay.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity to speak. My name is Victoria Cambranes. I'm actually a council candidate running to represent this district. I grew up here and have walked across the streets along Fulton or along Abolitionist Place and where this park is going to be placed. I've been working with a lot of local activists involved in abolitionist history for many years now. And what I've been hearing is simply that the community feels that their voices haven't been consulted in a way, an engaging way that maybe to the degree that it should have. And so my concern is always for a diversity of voices to be brought forward. I truly appreciate the artist's artwork. I think it's a beautiful design. However, it could be the best design in the world if it doesn't include at least a degree of engagement with the community, then someone is going to feel left out. And so I want to encourage that as much as possible. Even if the final design is exactly what it is today, we still want to have that engagement. It's absolutely important, and especially when dealing with this subject, dealing with this area, which has seen a lot of displacement, gentrification, and just overall erasing of history. We really want to honor that and to honor the voices who have been in this fight for a really long time. So thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other commissioners who'd like to speak up before I wrap up and we take a vote? Okay. So I want to also raise my glass to Kameelah, who made a very powerful presentation. And I don't think that she was given sufficient credit by a number of those members of the public who spoke about her outreach process, which actually, to me, struck me as someone who attempts to do this as well for a living, very robust and acknowledging a gamut of people's abilities and capabilities. So I do feel that she has laid out a roadmap of outreach and incorporation, and in her own words again, specifically said that the reason you don't have a proposal before you is that I have yet to develop it with your voices. So I believe that we have an individual before us who enters into this process capturing what many of you are asking for. I do need to just say a couple of things for those of you who may not be so familiar with the Design Commission, that while I personally think that this park should be renamed, that is not in our jurisdiction. I also have to say that in terms of the process through by which this artist was selected, that is done through the Department of Cultural Affairs, and it is not something over which we have jurisdiction. We do have jurisdiction, however, over how this evolves. And we want to support this artist. As Commissioner Valverde said, we don't tell an artist how to design. We don't tell anyone how to design. We are here to give helpful critiques, listen to members of the public. What I heard today from a number of members of the public is that many of you were focused on the past and focused on events and people and places of the past that are embodied within a close proximity to this site, if not directly under the site. And what I heard from Ms. Rasheed is that she is looking to the future. How do we think about, talk about, interpret the future of the past? And so this will be an extraordinary challenge and an extraordinary opportunity to bring together a very real, not well understood, often miscommunicated history with a future that we all must understand, and for many of us on the commission, white people in particular, reckon with. And I look upon this project as a rare opportunity. And because of the artist's use of language, one thing that we're missing in this country more than anything, I feel, is people talking to each other. We have set ourselves up into camps, we have divided ourselves, and now we need to think about how to communicate with each other. If this piece of work can communicate this very real, very important, undertold, mistold history, and bring us forward to a future in which we really understand what abolition meant and cannot ever mean again in the future, in the sense that we hope that this doesn't have to be abolished again in the future, but we must move forward. So Kameelah, we are here for you. We are here to help this process. If there are things that we can do as a commission, and just to say that we fully appreciate and do not challenge you on the fact that you came today with an intentional lack of specificity. And I want everyone who is listening today to appreciate this lack of specificity. We are not going to give approval, as Carrie mentioned at the beginning, until this process has moved further along. Nonetheless, we are at a place where we need to vote on what has been presented thus far. And I think the commission, and we will take a vote on this, would like to table this proposition so that there is greater opportunity for the artist to hear some of the voices that perhaps have not been heard for whatever reason we won't dwell on. And also very much to suggest to the artist as well as to the agency that the artwork, that the artists have the freedom to select locations within this abolitionist park that are appropriate to what she wants to convey. That said, I will now ask for a vote. We have a couple of commissioners who are recused, so if you don't hear their names, it is because of their recusal. So this is a roll call vote on item, I hope I haven't lost my place here, item 27674. When I call your name, you may state your vote as approve, reject, table, or abstain. Phil Ahrens, I believe, is recused, no?
Yes.
Right. Ken Seth Armstead is recused. Lori Hawkinson.
Table.
Deborah Martin.
Table.
Richard Moore.
Table.
Susan Morgenthau.
Table.
Ethel Sheffer.
Table.
Merrill Tish, I believe, is not here. Mary Valverde
Tabled.
and myself table. So that is a quorum. Sorry.
I was skipped. I table also.
Oh, so sorry, Manuel. I don't know why. So sorry, Manuel. And myself table. So that is for those commissioners present, unanimous. And the staff can follow up with the Economic Development Corporation and Ms. Rasheed to give further guidance if necessary. Thank you all for your time, and have a good afternoon, and fingers crossed.